Welcome back. This is chemistry question 49 from IMAT 2018 past paper. So I'll be answering this question. It says consider this ionic equation in aqueous solution. This is a CH₃O minus, which is methoxide ion reacting with water that gives products methanol and hydroxide. So it asks which statement about this reaction is correct. So the given options have the key terms, which is Brønsted-Lowry base, Lewis acid. So it's related to acid-base sort of reaction and stuff. So before we solve this or look through these statements, we have to recall the definition for these terms, Brønsted-Lowry and Lewis. So we know in Brønsted-Lowry acid-base. So I'm gonna just write here Brønsted-Lowry. This is short form. So in Brønsted-Lowry, mainly includes, it involves protons. So it mainly involves the transfer of protons, which is the H plus, the hydrogen ions between the species. So the acid donates the protons, whereas the base gains the proton. So the Brønsted-Lowry acid base mainly includes the involve of transfer of protons, which are hydrogen ions. And for the Lewis acid and base, for Lewis acid and base, it involves the transfer of pairs of electron. Pairs of electron. So the acid, the Lewis acid gains, it gains pair of electrons, whereas the base donates pair of electrons. So acid gains pair of electron from base. So this is mainly included in Lewis acid and base, whereas in Brønsted-Lowry, it mainly involves the transfer of protons only between acids and base. So we must also know that if one species is considered as Brønsted-Lowry, they can also be considered as Lewis acid. So we'll discuss that after we construct it. The mechanism for this reaction so that we can clearly identify the transfer of electrons and also protons. So first of all, we have to mention that this water here, since we know that water by nature are defined as amphoteric, so in this case, since it's reacting against this methoxide ion, it will act as an acid, and whereas the methoxide ion will act as base because it donates its electron and also it gains a proton from the water. So it gets protonated from water to form methanol. So this methanol acts as conjugate acid, and the hydroxide ion acts as conjugate base. So we also must recall the definition for these two terms. So conjugate base, so they are formed when acid loses the proton, and whereas the conjugate acid, so in this conjugate acid, the product is mainly formed when the base gains the proton. So these are the main key terms, the definition we must know for solving this question. So now I'm gonna draw the mechanism, the diagram, so that it's easier. to identify how the reaction works. So this is the methoxide ion. I'm gonna draw here. So hydrogen. Just gonna draw a dot and cross diagram so that we can understand also the octet rules and stuff like that. So we can understand how the electrons are being transferred between the species. And so this one, I'm gonna draw dots over here and over here. And also for oxygen, I'm gonna draw as dots. So as this bonding over here. So this is methoxide ion, which is a polyatomic ion having overall charge of -1. So now we have here, which is water that acts as an acid. So we have the two lone pairs of electron and just these electron involved in bonding. Okay, so now we can identify. So this electron, pairs of electron on the oxygen atom, the ion, which is on the methoxide ion, this oxygen donates its pairs of electron to this hydrogen to form a bond. So it transfers its pair of electron to form a bond with this hydrogen in the water molecule. So this hydrogen transfers this electron, the electron involved in bonding between this hydrogen and oxygen and water molecules. So it will just give its bonding electron completely to oxygen. So this forms, so this will form, as we have mentioned here, the conjugate base, which is from the water, and also the conjugate acid, which is of the methoxide ion. So I'm gonna draw it over here. So methoxide ion is formed just over here. The methanol, sorry, methanol. And we have here is oxygen that has formed a bonding with this hydrogen that was gained from the water, forms a bonding, and plus we have here is the hydroxide ion, which is what we have mentioned as conjugate base. So it forms this bonding with it. It has overall negative charge since it's polyatomic ion. It's an ion, so this is hydroxide. Okay, so now we can clearly identify the transfer of electrons and protons in here, which makes it easy for us to identify which one acts as Lewis acid or base or Brønsted-Lowry acid and base. So now we can easily solve this question. So which statement about reaction is correct? Option A mentions water is acting as Brønsted-Lowry base. So we know this is wrong because water acts as Brønsted-Lowry acid. So why is that? As we mentioned, it donates its proton to the methoxide ion. because the oxygen transfers its lone pair of electrons to form a bond with this hydrogen in water molecule. And the methoxide ion is a Lewis acid, which is incorrect because it is Lewis base, because it donates its pairs of electrons to the water molecule. So that's why it's a base, a Lewis base. And then we have option C, which is the final mixture of solution would have pH below 7. So we know pH below 7 is acidic, which is incorrect because we have hydroxide ion over here, which increases the pH above 7. So, which makes it more alkaline solution. So this is wrong. So option D is the methanol is conjugate acid of methoxide ion. So yes, this is perfect. As we have mentioned over here, the conjugate acid and base, which is the methoxide and hydroxide. So yes, conjugate acid is the methoxide. The methanol is conjugate acid, as the methoxide ion, which is a base, gains the proton from the water to form that conjugate acid. So option E is the hydroxide ion is conjugate acid of water, which is wrong. It's conjugate base because the water loses the proton to the methoxide ion, which forms the conjugate base. So the only correct option is option D. The methanol is conjugate acid of methoxide ion. So this is how we solve the question. So thank you guys for watching my video. I hope you find this helpful. Please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys. Bye.